Welcome to the Eye of the Needle podcast, where we discuss healthcare innovation and explore how visionary entrepreneurs and change leaders are reshaping the future of our industry.
Welcome to the Eye of the Needle podcast. I'm your host, Pam Arlotto. Today, we're talking about something every healthcare leader faces sooner or later: uncertainty. The moment when the familiar path no longer fits and stepping into change feels risky but necessary. My guest, Dr. Stephanie Lahr, knows that moment well. A physician turned digital health executive, she served as a CIO, a CMIO, and now is founder of Vital Thread Advisory. She is leading at the intersection of care delivery and innovation. Stephanie's journey shows that change leadership isn't just about managing transformation of your organization. It's about having the courage to reinvent yourself and your organization when the path ahead isn't always clear. So, Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit more about your career journey and kind of how you got into healthcare and medicine and then all the different things you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. Love to do that. And thanks so much for having me. So, as you mentioned, I'm an internal medicine physician. I practiced clinically as a hospitalist. A story for another day could be the hurricane that happened when I was a resident that was really catapulted my belief in what an EHR was capable of. When if you think of soggy paper and the
Oh, no.
the potential implications of that, and the ability to leverage technology in that way and to support patient care, that happened really early in my career. I ended up going into private practice as a hospitalist in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, so well out of hurricane territory. And
Good.
I remember having a conversation with the CEO of the health system at the time, and this was a 200 bed community hospital, and this was circa 2008, so a minute or two ago. And
Hmm.
I said, hey, what are you doing for EHR? What's the strategy there for using technology? And he looked at me and he said, "Are you telling me you're a doctor who wants to use an EHR?"
How rare in those days.
Yes, exactly. And I said, "Well, I mean, they have their problems, but I had, again, I'd had this experience in Galveston when I was in training, and thought this is definitely where things are going. I could see the potential power of what we were going to be able to do, and decided I just needed to get on board." So, really, sort of serendipitously is how the whole thing began. I was practicing clinically, and he said, "Gosh, can you help our teams out? We have an informatics team. Maybe you could help them. Maybe you could give them advice." So I started doing that, and I did that for my own team and my own hospitalist group. And then it was like, well, maybe you could talk to the anesthesia doctors. Maybe you could talk to cardiology. Maybe you could talk to the ER. And then as that evolved over time, it became a formalized role. And then I went and got board certified in clinical informatics because I wanted to have more of a skill set in that area and do continuous learning. And I think we'll talk about that as a thread through my career, is this desire for continuous learning and pushing myself into new spaces. And so did that work with them for several years, then was recruited in 2016 to Monument Health in Rapid City, South Dakota, where I still live today. And that's a not-for-profit health system serving all of Western South Dakota, Eastern Wyoming, Northern Nebraska. Probably goes without saying, some significant geographic and rural challenges, but they were getting ready to go live with Epic. And I went to be the CMIO and help lead that deployment. And then shortly after we went live, the CIO, who had postponed his retirement until after that project was done, went ahead and retired. And the CEO of the health system said, you know, as tightly integrated as technology and clinical care delivery seem to be becoming, maybe having a clinician lead the strategic side of the organization related to technology would make sense, as opposed to having a technologist or a business backgrounded person, et cetera.
Or CEO there. That's
Yeah,
right.
and he said, so I guess I'm asking you, like, would you be willing to take on the role of the CIO, which was the role that I reported to? So my options were get a new boss or report to the CEO and take on that role. And of course, I had nervousness about it. I had not been a CIO before. I was learning a lot about the technology space in addition to informatics, but knew I still had plenty to learn. But I thought, why would I not take this opportunity? I knew that I could leverage skills and network that I had created and additional network I could build. And I was never afraid to say, I'm not the expert in this, but somebody, I'll surround myself with experts who could help along the way. And so I said, yes, let's do that. And so in 2018, I became the CIO. I didn't want to let go of the CMIO informatics side. So I did a dual role of CIO and CMIO. And that really allowed me to broaden the way that I was thinking about how technology was going to be able to influence care delivery, everything from beyond the clinical side, so thinking about revenue cycle, document management, billing, ERP, human capital management, all of
A
those.
lot of things that weren't clinical.
Yes, and things that I didn't learn about, in medical school or even in
Right.
my informatics training. And then even things beyond that to things like what does networking infrastructure need to look like in an organization of our geography, scope, and size to support the evolution of where technology is going? How do we think about, moving things into the cloud? What makes sense, what doesn't? So I was able to really, again, dig in and learn, surround myself with a great group of colleagues who could help me in that learning, but expand the way I was thinking about the use of technology in healthcare. While I was doing that, I also thought that there was really an opportunity for an organization the size of Monument to be a great development ground, right, for where technologies were going. We had a reasonably good sized team. We were on modern infrastructure and systems. And I thought, we might be small, but we can be mighty and we can go and do cool things. And we have less potential, administrative and structural burden because of the more flatness of the organization our size. And so I started collaborating with a number of different vendors and saying, hey, where are you going and how could we be a part of it? And there's a balance there. Certainly, you can't have the team so forward focused on development and working with other technologies to not provide the support of what's needed today. But the team really loved it, right? The combination of being able to continue to support the applications and things that we were already doing, but to be able to be part of what might be able to come next and use their expertise and knowledge and their organizational history to be able to help companies figure out how to navigate that. So we kind of became this, fostering ground with a number of different companies for trialing new things, giving feedback on new products. And as a part of that, then I met Andrew Gostein, who's the CEO of Artisight, who also a fellow physician and had started that company with this amazing vision of how do we think about the next phases of technology and ambient, sort of support, but beyond documentation, and thinking about if we could see, hear, know where things are in space, in a patient room, in a hospital, in a clinic, in an operating room, whatever those environments are, how do we leverage the sensor information that we may be able to see, hear, and understand, and provide automation to the bedside caregivers, right? So how do we allow for communication to be unburdened? How do we allow for documentation to be unburdened by leveraging this kind of new smart technology? I was super excited about that. We developed a relationship and he then said, hey, you seem as excited about this as I am. Maybe you should come join me. And that's when I made a really, probably pretty significant decision. And probably the two most significant decisions that I had to work through in my career were, one, deciding to not practice clinically anymore. So when I took
Right.
the role as CIO and CMIO, I gave up my clinical practice. It was just too
Always a
much to
big
be able to
decision.
do. That was, a lot of consternation, deep thought, and evaluation I had to do about that. And then the second one was a couple of years later when I had this potential opportunity to leave the provider side of healthcare and go to the vendor side. But the way I really looked at that was, as a provider, I had delivered care one person at a time. As a leader in a health system, I was delivering and supporting care in a community at a time. And moving into this vendor space, really, there was the potential to be transformative on a broader scale and push the envelope of where all that could go. So again, I didn't, I hadn't gone to business school. I didn't have extensive experience. I joke to people all the time, like, we didn't cover marketing and sales and commercialization in medical school, but I jumped in and was passionate about the work that we were doing, wanted the world to know about it, and had 2.5 wonderful years helping to grow that company, helping people understand where technology could be going and how to think about getting there in a stepwise process, particularly given some of the challenges financially. And then decided, from there most recently to leave and started my own advisory, which really was around this idea that that combination of each of these segments of my career provide something unique, but when brought together could help a number of different companies, health systems, et cetera. And that maybe that didn't mean I needed to be tied to any one particular organization, but could work on a, more broad basis, doing some things for a number of companies instead of all things for one. So
Well, and I'm sure in that role, you continue your goal of learning because when you start a new relationship with a new company or start a new project in an area you may or may not have worked in before, that gives you that chance, which it sounds like that's one of your strengths is continuing to learn and applying what you've learned. Is that fair?
yeah, absolutely. And I think, I was just at a conference last week where folks were talking about imposter syndrome and this idea that, you kind of stand in your own way of sometimes thinking that you're capable of jumping into the next thing, especially, there's data to support that women in particular who don't check all the boxes might not apply for the role or might not think that they can do it. And I think if you can keep this idea alive that you want to learn more, you're willing to learn more, that movement is enough to help you overcome any of that sort of imposter syndrome language in your own mind and say, well, I've learned a whole bunch of other things. I can learn this too.
That keeps it interesting, don't you think? That you're working on multiple different topics and subject matters with different personalities and different problems you're solving. It's
Yeah.
not
And
just
you
doing the
bring
same thing every day.
Right, and you bring a then more diversified perspective, right? I mean, conversations I'm having with, vendor-sided organizations today are everything from what I think of their product as if I was a clinical end user, to then also saying, well, what is your go-to-market strategy and how are you, how are you going to tie this into an ROI for a health system? And those are things that, are very diverse from each other and are things that I've learned about
You
along the
Well, you've
way. The
been on the
first
other
time
side. You've been the buyer,
and I've been exactly. But
yeah,
I didn't know. I mean, go to market strategy and the, some of those even the terms were things I had to learn at some
right.
point. But the perspective that then once I did learn them, I could bring in saying, well, I was the buyer and I've been a seller. And so here's how both sides of that might be thinking about it. And here's some recommendations for, kind of how to move things forward. But again, if you can be really amazing at one thing and build a career on that, that's fine. For me, I just wanted to keep, and I continue to want to keep changing it up. It keeps me fresh. And I think it offers something different in the market because I have a broader understanding and appreciation for some of the things that, people on multiple sides are going through.
Yeah, I tell people that I coach quite a bit that it's like a Venn diagram, and some people have multiple Venn diagrams where their sweet spot combines multiple experiences and backgrounds. And because of that, you have a perspective that probably no other person does. And it's really nice to be able to combine a lot of those experiences and learnings. So I noticed on your LinkedIn that you say you're dedicated to bringing the joy back to medicine and reducing the friction. How have you been able to do that in these roles, and which one do you think contributed the most to that goal?
Yeah. So I have joked with a number of people that early in my career as a CMIO, when we were sort of deep in the space of trying to, you know, meet meaningful use requirements, get EMR and ERP and, these PACS and these foundational systems deployed. If I wanted to be authentic to my constituents, my clinical end users and colleagues, I felt like the only billboard I could really reliably post was, I can make it suck less. Um,
That's great.
I don't know if that's really billboard worthy, but it was honest, and it was where we were at the time, and that those foundations needed to be built. But I
Hmm.
had this feeling, and it was honestly some of the early work I did with nuanced DAX way, way early in there, before it was even called DAX, right? It was in
Right.
their early development, and they were postulating what could all of this look like. I thought, I can see these glimmers of where technology has the potential to take us, where the conversation doesn't have to be about making it suck less. It can really be about bringing the joy back and bringing the clinician closer to the patient, bringing everyone that's on the care delivery side closer to the work that they went and did training for. And so I think some of it was built on a hope and a dream that we could get there, as well as, again, some early glimpses of where advanced technology companies were thinking things could go, even if the tech wasn't quite there to execute on it. You could see the roadmap of how we were going to get there. And then when I met Andrew and he started talking about cameras and speakers in every patient room and how we were going to be able to detect things with computer vision, I was like, what? Now, okay,
It's
that's
kind of
next
mind blowing, isn't
level.
it?
Yeah, it's next level. And yet
Right.
there were plenty of people early on in the conversations I had with people who were like, well, I mean, no one will ever want that. We won't do that. We don't want people recording. And it was like, well, it doesn't have to be recording. Recording isn't a part of it. It's more a window, right? And how do we, but it was this concept that we could untether the clinician from the tech and make the tech work for and with the clinician rather than the opposite. And so,
Right.
it's hard to say the one moment or the one thing that I think has moved the needle on that the most, because honestly, at each given time, based on what technology was capable of and where we were as adopters of technology and our ability to take those things on, that's been an evolution and will continue to be. I'm very
Sure.
excited about, what this next 5 years looks like, with all of the different tool sets that are coming out with AI and agentic, artificial intelligence on top of the LLM technology that we already
Right.
have. Starting to feel in some ways like the sky is really the limit, and we've only just begun to figure out how we can reduce the friction and how we can bring the joy back. I think the most important thing to stay focused on while we're doing that is, and I was on an AI panel recently, and somebody said, well, with all the things that are out there, how do we decide what to start with? I'm like, write this down. Start with a problem you need to solve, right?
Absolutely.
Not getting
Absolutely.
distracted by the tools themselves, not getting distracted by the labels that people are putting on them, but really looking at the problems that you need to solve and figuring out, has technology evolved in such a way that there's now a new solution to that problem that we could look at in a different way?
Mhm. Well, one truism I've used over my career is one third of the people embrace and are excited about change. Another third may be skeptical, but they can and will change. And then a third will never change because they're always saying that won't work. And I think that's true both in an organizational change initiative, but also a career change and the uncertainty that comes with it. And there's that you mentioned earlier the imposter syndrome, but the kind of the emotional roller coaster, if you will. There's fear, there's excitement, there's doubt, there's conviction. It what has been the best way for you personal to kind of manage those emotions and kind of the ups and the downs and all in between over over all this change you've gone through in your career?
I think it's a combination of two things. One, I have a network of mentor colleagues and friends that when it comes time to make some of these significant decisions, that I dialogue with them about that. And oftentimes it's less about what they say in return and more about me just articulating it in a new way that allows me to even think about it differently. And so, as an example, when I decided that I was leaving Artisite and evaluating what I was going to do next, the path to, creating Vital Thread Advisory was not immediate. But I
Mhm.
had a conversation with a mentor, and he, through the conversation sort of suggested, gosh, maybe this is an opportunity for you to do something on your own. And I immediately said, no, 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 that's
Right.
that's not what I do. I work for a corporation. Benefits and paychecks and things come in, and I toe the line, and I'm a great worker, but somebody else is sort of taking on that overarching responsibility. And so
Right.
that comes then to the second thing, which is I had this great mentor conversation, and then came the reflection. And I think that is the combination of being able to have a group, or some group of people to be able to dialogue with things about, and then to take the time to reflect on those conversations, certain other experiences, and ask myself, why am I saying that? Why do I think that? Why is that? What's beneath that? And
Mhm.
in that particular situation, I asked myself, wow, as I reflect on that conversation, I barely let those words hang in the air for a half a second before I immediately shut it down. What was happening there? And
Right.
that suggested to me it was somewhat emotionally driven. And so then I dug to that further, and I thought, this seems to be based in some fear and
Mhm.
lack of knowledge. Fear
Mhm.
is no way to live your life. And so if I may have to deal with it, but if I can acknowledge it, I can set it aside, find a way to compartmentalize it and deal with it. And then the lack of knowledge, great. This is just something else I've never done before, something else I can learn about. And so I just started digging in and learning and saying, well, what could this look like? What are the options? I have to go get health insurance for the first time by myself. What does that even look like? How do I do that? Where do I go? And so again, relying on a network, relying on now all the tools we have, even, Chat GPT has told me a whole bunch about how to run a
I'm
business.
sure.
But those two things, having a solid network of people that I can, navigate with through different potential conversations around where my career or decisions I have to make are going, and then taking the time to reflect on some of those conversations and other things so that I can really understand why I'm having the responses or why I'm thinking the way that I am. And then if I need to change that, I can pivot.
So, how long was your reflection period from the point you said, "No way, I'm not going to do it," to the point you said, "I am going to do
It was only about 3 days,
it"?
honestly.
Okay.
And I feel like for me, just, and this is probably, more who I am, these things do sort of come in relatively short, waves of processing. I don't know that I would say that I think that's, the right thing for everyone, but for me, that I didn't need a lot of thought about it. I needed the opportunity just to look at it differently. And once I did, it was like, oh, okay. So this isn't a no, this is a how. The other thing is, I sort of believe the universe speaks to you and guides things along the way. While I was doing some of the contemplation on this, I had a couple of conversations that came up just sort of out of the blue with other people in the market asking questions about, what do you think about fractional roles? Do you know people? And I was like, well, wait, this is, I mean, two CEOs reached out to me that week and said, I'm looking at doing something creative around chief medical officers, but I don't really know how to do that. Is that even a thing? How would that work? And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is a thing. And then started working through what those details look like. So again, for me, it happened relatively quickly. I don't know that I think that that's right or wrong. That's just sort of my experience.
Are there any signs that you personally recognize in yourself that it's time for you to make a change?
One of the things that I've realized about myself in the last probably 6 to 12 months is I love transformation and change.
Mhm.
Even, I'll go back to, the days of my CMIO days. My favorite days as a CMIO were going live with a new system, taking a new group of users live. Give me a go live with 24-hour chaos for 2 weeks straight. Like, I love it.
That's
I
great.
I am stimulated by it. The excitement of being able to see things transforming in front of you is something that I gravitate toward. And so as I looked at then the work that I did, as a CIO and a bunch of the transformative, sort of projects and things that I took on, and then going to Artisite and the transformation of that company that we were able to work on together in the 2.5 years, I realized that that's what I really love. And the kinds of roles and opportunities that I should be working on are things where I get to help be an agent of transformation.
Right.
And there are amazing operators out there who need to take the role of, as transformation turns into ongoing execution. That is a skill set that is an amazing skill set. That's not where my passion lies. I can
Right.
do it, but it's not what I love to do. And so while
You
I
like
have the
that
opportunity,
early on chaos and envisioning how it could be different and kind of the things that keep you on your toes and bringing that in that learning, that sounds like.
yeah, but also seeing it through to execution, right? I think right now
Yes.
we are seeing a lot of situations where there's big, bold visions and a struggle to execute.
Right. I agree.
And so I want to help support and create the vision and also the strategy and plan to execute. Once the execution is complete, I'm more than happy to hand over the reins to super capable people who will make sure that those pieces remain in place and I can go on to the next transformational opportunity.
That's great. Well, one thing, with all of post COVID and all of the workforce challenges we've had, one thing you hear quite a bit about, particularly in our healthcare delivery organizations, is the burnout that so many clinicians and other leaders are experiencing. And what have you advised your colleagues or others that have either worked for you? Sometimes that burnout that it is they just need to do, to have a different perspective or different role. But then also sometimes it's just this deeper desire to change things and to be more innovative and transformative. How do you distinguish either in yourself or others the difference between burnout and just that deeper desire for change?
Yeah, I think, burnout is a complex topic in and of itself and is multifaceted in, for each individual, what the origin is. But I think some of the data that we have definitely suggests that a lack of control
Mm,
is can be a central element to a feeling of burnout. If you feel like if you're in, high intensity situations of which healthcare is completely full of, and you add to that high intensity situation a sense that you don't have any choices, you don't have any control, and that it's sort of happening to you and around you, not with you or for, or not, basically not with you. Um,
right.
then I think that is oftentimes where we can see some of the roots of burnout. And so when I have conversations with people who are feeling that, one, it is first, it's just an acknowledgement of sort of saying, gosh, it seems like that's where I'm at. And it doesn't mean I need to throw out everything I'm doing. I just need to find my way back to some control. That control can be anything from changing a schedule, altering the way, not the kind of work that you're doing, but how much of the work that you're doing. Is that, doing something part-time and blending something else in? Is that, from a care delivery perspective, is that working, in two different kinds of environments? There's so many new and cool options coming out. Like virtual care, I think is really, it's so important. It's going to be an amazing equalizer of being able to deliver high quality care across, specialties and across geographies. But maybe you're the kind of person who you should stay in the clinical delivery model all the time, but maybe you just need a couple of shifts that are virtual and a couple that are in person. Maybe you want to be a part of the change, and maybe that is then getting involved in your organization's, informatics, IT, governance, any of those kinds of areas, so that you can again be a part of the change, take back some of that control. Maybe it's actually going out and being an entrepreneur and finding some side element that you can do, some solution to a problem that exists that you can help create. But I think a lot of, my guidance to people that are facing some of those challenges is to think about where they could take control in some ways, and by regaining some of that control, build back their happiness in the work that they're doing.
That makes a lot of sense. And so often when individuals, I see this all the time, when they face uncertainty or they know that something's not quite right, like say they're experiencing burnout or they're just not liking an aspect of their position, sometimes they just need to step back and not get frozen. I mean, you hear so many people that just can't decide what's next because of that uncertainty. And there can be many aspects. They view it as a risk that they don't want to take. They could view it as a financial risk, professional risk. And I guess what's your take on that risk taking and helping people be willing to maybe jump and try something because it won't always be something you can't correct or adjust. I mean, what's your take on
Yeah.
making a decision to kind of take that leap?
Yeah, two things there. One, I think you just were, really starting to highlight, which is nothing. eh, Well, I won't say nothing, but death can't be undone. But other
Right.
than that, most things can, right? So taking a pivot into another area, into another industry, into whatever it might be, if there are compelling reasons that are drawing you to it, you can always pivot back, right? So
Right.
I think sometimes people overemphasize the change. This is just the next chapter. There will be another chapter beyond that. And
Right.
so not allowing yourself to get so mired down in a belief that this is, of massive significance. Obviously, there may be significant implications, but
Mhm.
it's really just a chapter, and it helps the evolution of your story, and you'll go to that next place next. The other thing, it comes back to the introspection and reflection. I think you really need to understand what's driving your potential aversion to the risk. So I
Mhm.
had a conversation with a colleague recently who was looking at a role that they were very excited about.
Mhm.
And yet they were uncertain and they were worried about the risk. And I said, well, what risk? And the conversation moved to things more like, I'm worried about what other people will think. I'm
Mhm.
worried about, I used to work at X size of an organization. These are all the reasons I'd like to work at this type of an organization now, but I'm worried about how that will be perceived. Or I've done all this work to get to this point in my career. Will this look like a step back? And my comment back was, first, haters gonna hate, right? People who people who want to bring you down, people who want to look at your career and figure out something that they can criticize, they're going to do it. It doesn't matter which direction you take. If their whole purpose is to find something that allows them to find, fault in what you're doing, they'll find it. So while it can be motivating to have, sort of that feeling of like you want to prove that you can do certain things, and that can actually help you overcome the risk, you have to be careful that that line between motivation and manipulation doesn't you don't let that occur to you, because
Right.
really, if you let that concern over whatever that risk is, which is external to you, manipulate you and your decision making, then you're not being true to yourself and where you're wanting to go. So I think it's, again, using the introspection to understand what's driving the concern about why that risk is there, what you can do to mitigate the risk. And if you can find ways to mitigate the risk, and or the risk is something that is external to you that honestly in the big picture shouldn't matter, then it's easier to set those things aside and then take the leap.
Yes, that makes so much sense. If you could go back and have a conversation with a much younger version of yourself, what would you advise that person about uncertainty and risk taking?
I think I would advise myself that being uncomfortable is good.
I love that.
Being a risk taker is good. I'm an internal medicine physician. In fact, a colleague of mine recently said, "Steph, this is kind of mind blowing to me, some of the things that you're out there doing. We are internists. We like overthink everything. We analyze it all. That we're not risk takers. That's, that's these other, that's the neurosurgeons, that's the orthopods." And I'm like,
Right,
"What?"
right.
And I'm like, "Yeah, but it doesn't have to be that way." And honestly, some of the most, if you'd asked me when I was in medical school, would I ever be the CIO of a health system? I would have said, I don't even know what that is. Why?
That's
No,
right.
that sounds
Yeah.
crazy. And yet
Yes.
I would never give it back. It was an amazing experience, both as a leader to be able to support the growth of other people. It was amazing from the perspective of what I was able to learn, and now ways that I can contribute back into healthcare that I wouldn't be able to do without that experience. But I think I would tell my younger self, who was very focused on doing the exact right thing, meeting the expectations of everyone else, making everyone else around me happy, and saying, "You know what? You're going to have to push on that." And I'm much more, I don't edgy and willing to push those envelopes now than I was as a younger person. I don't think I would, I don't regret any of this decisions along the way, but I might have gotten a little more comfortable with that discomfort sooner.
Well, and it's certainly a path you couldn't have predicted. And I find back to this paralysis. People want to predict the path and know every step. And that's virtually impossible. It's like a puzzle, and you put this piece in, and you'd never find the next piece if you hadn't put that first piece in. And
Absolutely.
you've got to kind of grow and build it over time. So let's talk a little bit more about your experience having your own firm and being your own boss. Obviously, you have clients and customers, and they kind of are your bosses, but it's a different experience than working in an organization where there's a hierarchy and defined reporting relationships. So, what have been your surprises? Things that you would have never expected making this leap and taking this risk? And you how long have you been doing it now? How many
Maybe 3.5, 4 months ish. Yeah.
ha and what have been some of your surprises or lessons learned?
So I think one of the things I'm realizing is that I do love a team. I
Right,
love working with a team and leading a team. And I'm
right,
having to find new and different ways to support that part of, I'm a social person. I like interacting with people, and I'm either on the road with, 200 of my closest friends at some, conference or things like that, or I'm at home in my office by myself. But that's
Working away.
different. Yes. But that's different than having, the mentoring ability of leading a team and, watching the progress of something that you're deeply connected to. And so a couple of things that I'm doing is, in the roles that I select, in the companies that I look to work with, I look for opportunities where it is a great team that wants
Hmm.
me to become a part of that team. Because even if I'm only a part of that team some of the time, it
Right.
fills my cup in both what I get from that and what I can give back to that. And then I also am thoughtful about acknowledging that loneliness is kind of a piece of it, and that's okay. I'm learning
Mhm.
different, I don't, it doesn't have to be stimulation all the time. Even my calendar, right? I remember as a CIO, I didn't have 10 minutes during a day
No.
to think about eating or going to the bathroom. And
Right.
now now that I architect my own day, my own schedule and working around, the companies that I'm working with, I find myself thinking, well, I should build in some time to work out. I'm going to
Right.
build in time to, go to my kid's school this afternoon. And it's been a rewire in my mind, but it's been
Right.
great. But a rewire of almost a feeling of guiltiness, like, oh, well, I must not be busy enough if I have time to, do a workout during the day. I must not be busy enough if I have time to go to
Right.
my kid's football game this afternoon. And
Right.
so it's that combination of, it's been very freeing in those ways and gives me some autonomy and ability to architect things differently that I didn't have the flexibility to be able to do in a more corporate structure. But
Mhm.
then also figuring out how to feed that part of me that loves that corporate structure, which is, the building of a team, moving through progress together, and watching what you're building, grow and develop.
Well, and I recognize that as well because I'm an extrovert extraordinaire. And when I launched my firm, I had just come from Ernst. So I was used to having, 20 consultants at my disposal whenever I'd snap my fingers, different subject matter experts or whatever. And I like what you said about being creative. So what I did is I found what I called my friends and my family. Family were people that were other independent consultants or other small firms that worked with me on a regular basis. And then friends were those that I would pull in on a special needs basis because they had a unique expertise that we needed for a certain effort. And I like that you're doing it in your fractional work with kind of adopting the team that is at your customers. I mean, so it is that there's not just one size fits all on a way to do things. So that's really really important. Have you had any small wins or even big wins up front that were exciting to you?
Well, I think what I love the most is, and I sort of guessed that it would be like this, but the way that it's come together has been even more fun, is working with multiple different groups and companies has allowed not only me to grow and learn, but there are elements I take from one. And it's amazing how the timing of something will just perfectly, off a conversation about something completely different, someone will say something, or something is shared, or, something comes out of that that then has applicability to something else that I'm working on. And just the synergy of being able to bring those things together, I think I'm able to offer more to each of these groups in this fractional way than I would if I was fully dedicated to them, because I have these other experiences that, a conversation occurs and I bring it in, I'm like, gosh, I just met this person at a conference that I was at with a totally different company, but we should be thinking about this, or you should meet them. And
Absolutely.
so the
Right.
synergy between them has really been very, very fun.
Well, and they always one of the criticisms of consultants or outside advisors is they ask you to see your watch so they can tell you what time it is. But I do agree with you, being able to see how many different organizations and leaders attack a similar problem can be so valuable because it makes you be very creative and you go, maybe we don't even need a watch. We've got something else that we're using today to address that. So, do you have any advice for somebody who's kind of thinking, well, maybe I'll go out on my own. Maybe I'll start advising others. I mean, is there something that you think that individual needs and as part of their DNA to be able to do it? Are there any people you would say don't do it? Any thoughts on that?
I think it's more about the process of assessing it, right? I mean, I am not presumptuous enough to think that I could say these are the right people and these are not the right people to do it. I think
Mhm.
I could say dig into what it is you think you have to offer, and is it something that the ecosystem needs, right? I think the other thing is also being creative how you think about it. I don't consider myself a consultant. I
Mhm.
consider myself a fractional executive.
Perfect. Right.
Not every organization needs a full-time chief medical officer or needs a full-time chief strategy officer or
Right.
needs a, whatever those things might be. And yet
Mhm.
for those organizations that I might take on that role in a fractional capacity, I'm all in as a part of that team for that role for whatever is needed in that space. So I think, figuring out what do you love? What are you good at? What does the market need? And can you see those things coming together, even if it's not in a traditional sort of consulting kind of way?
Well, and there are a lot of ways to define that.
Yes.
You've defined it in a way that is very clear, and it's not hard for people to understand your elevator speech because you go, I can be in these specific roles. It doesn't have to be full time. I mean, so it sounds like you've done a lot of work to really put some clarity around the services you want to provide.
But I would also add that I have created some flexibility in that
Hmm.
each of these roles doesn't have to look the same. And not everything needs a title, not everything needs a press release.
Right.
Sometimes it's just about what the product is, what the product and the team need, and is there an opportunity for me to add value to that? And
Hmm.
so, maybe that will be something that only lasts 3 months. Maybe that will be
Hmm.
something that lasts 3 years. But I think the difference between the way I think about being a consultant versus being a fractional part of the team is ownership.
Hmm.
I want to dig in and own whatever the work is that's being asked as a part of, moving and advancing things forward. And
Hmm.
again, that might be temporary and it might be part-time, but it's still a level of ownership where I think, when people think of the traditional consulting, they think, you come in and tell me what to do and then I got to go do it. When you're working fractionally, there may be things that it makes more sense for somebody else to execute on certain elements of that than me because of the limited amount of interaction we have. But that doesn't mean that I am not owning it from the standpoint, like I'm there to see it all the way through to whatever the goals are that we've set.
Makes sense. That really makes a lot of sense. So, one of the things that I guess a continuing thread I've heard from you today is how much you value your network, both colleagues that maybe are peers, your mentors that you've mentioned. Talk a little bit about the way you have networked over your career and what it has brought to you in terms of thinking about some of these different roles.
I try my best to never say no to an opportunity for a first conversation.
Hmm.
Even when I was a CIO and I was being bombarded by all kinds of, tech vendors who wanted to sell me things and, things like that, I tried really hard to find time to at least be able to have a conversation. Anytime somebody makes an introduction, I want to take the time to have that initial conversation. Who knows what that might bring in the moment versus what it might bring down the road. But I have found, particularly in the last 6 months, conversations that I maybe started 2 years ago, which were brief but authentic and sincere, have now turned into outreach of like, hey, I see that things are changing. Can we have a conversation? Maybe that's because they want to consider something similar. Maybe it's because they have some work they want me to do for them. Maybe it's because they just are trying to understand and want to be supportive of where I'm going in my career. But I think over the years, trying the best I can to really dedicate a pretty significant chunk of time to building relationships and maintaining those relationships and being
Right.
thoughtful about the changes that other people are going through and supporting them through that is one of the most valuable things I'll take away from my career ever, even beyond accomplishments of products that may excel or companies that, have big wins. At the end of the day, the human to human relationships that have come out of these different experiences really are the things that I cherish. And so I really do try to dedicate time and again, authenticity and sincerity around saying yes to conversations, saying yes to just meeting, and then seeing where things go.
Well, and I get a lot of companies that are new to the market, say startups or even growth firms, that are really struggling right now with the old sales model of call it on the CIO or the CMIO or the health system executive. Or those are very difficult because of what you mentioned earlier. Everybody's bombarded with so many people trying to get in the door, trying to get on their radar. What advice do you have to a company, or have you given some of the companies you've advised and worked with on how do you get the buyers to even know you exist, and that sometimes the old let's persevere and sell may or may not be the right approach. What are your thoughts on what you've seen out in the industry about that?
Yeah. One is I would say that's a complete reason in and of itself to have built an extensive and authentic and sincere network is
That's right.
there are people that I have bought from multiple times as they've
Mhm.
gone to multiple different companies, in
Mhm.
part because I built a relationship with them. We built a relationship together that I then trust them and their thought processes around where they think the industry is going and therefore the products that they're willing to put their name behind. So when
Right,
they're doing something new, I want to hear about it, but it's
right,
because we built something that was a relationship rooted in, typically something more personal and authentic than just I have this widget that you should buy. And if finding opportunities, going to networking events and really networking at them rather than looking for the opportunity to make a pitch
right.
is, I think, super important. People see right through that, and you can sound as authentic and interested in them as possible, as you think, and then suddenly, dive into a pitch and lose that credibility really quickly. There's a time and a place for those things, but networking authentically to build relationships, I think, is essential. The other thing is endorsement, right? I'd way rather honestly hear from a friend or a colleague who's had great success with
Right.
what you've done and then decide, oh gosh, yeah, I'd be interested in a conversation, than having the salesperson themselves tell me, here's what you need to know about us. So
Mhm.
help me expand my network. If you can introduce me to someone and say, gosh, do you know the, CIO or CMIO or whatever it is at this particular organization? They're an amazing person. And by the way, we've also had some really great success. You've helped build my network. I now can I have a connection with them? And then I hear authentically from them about the product. Nothing sells to me more than the success that somebody else has had. Now, certainly there are going to be times where you need to be, and I was at times on the cutting edge of doing things that other people weren't. But normally that happened in places where I had built relationships with people that I trusted and therefore had a lot of respect for where they were going. So I was willing to bring them into what I was doing. And then I went out and evangelized the work that they were doing because I believed in it and I wanted them to do well.
And no matter how big our industry gets, it's still a small world. People do trust those individuals that either they've developed the relationship with or someone they know well has developed that relationship. It makes a huge difference. So I usually end my podcast by thanking my guest, but also asking them one other question. What's the one thing that we haven't talked about today in regards to career path, uncertainty, risk taking, learning, etc., that we haven't talked about, but maybe we should have?
Failure.
All right, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's easy and ties into a bit of imposter syndrome
Hmm.
to hear a podcast, watch an interview, meet someone, see them present something on stage, and think, wow, what they're doing is probably unattainable for me. It looks like things are perfect for them. It looks like, they've got it all together, they've got it all figured out. And again, kind of deepens your belief in, well, then that's probably not something that's achievable for me. The
Hmm.
reality is we all fail,
Hmm.
and they might be small failures, they might be large failures. They might be failures that only you see versus what, the external entities might see, or the opposite. Somebody else might see something that you did as a failure and you might not. But if
Right,
we aren't pushing, I grew up snow skiing and teaching my kids to ski and snowboard. And I still take lessons, to this day.
right,
I try to take a lesson a year. And one of the things an instructor told me a long time ago was, if you haven't fallen, you're not trying hard enough,
right.
not pushing yourself. And so I think that is a piece that, one, we need to be willing, and some of this comes back to that risk taking. We need to be willing to take some of the risks. We're going to fall. And then you've got your network, you've got your own internal strengths to figure out how to get back up again. But we could have a whole nother interview about, the time I almost got fired, and the time, everybody has these setbacks, or seemingly setbacks along the way, but typically turn into learning opportunities and growth. And I've had those experiences in my life, and I think it's easy from the outside looking in to see what someone has accomplished and think that that path has been without challenges and without failure, and
Right.
no one got to anywhere that they is worth going to without some failure along the way. And so you need to figure out how to get through it, figure out how to learn from it, and understand that everybody's going through it.
And often you're harder on yourself than other people see. I think back to that. I think kind of that imposter syndrome. We all have it, no matter where we are in our careers. So, well, thank
Exactly.
you so much. I've really enjoyed our talk today, and I'm sure it's going to help a lot of others. I remember years ago going to an AMDIS meeting, and there was a panel of physicians talking about physicians can get fired. And it was like a big news to learn. But this year, you were on a panel where you were all talking about taking risk and dealing with change and uncertainty in your career. So we've progressed from we can get fired to now there are many options and many opportunities that change can bring us. So,
Absolutely.
well, thanks so much, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much, Pam. It was great talking to you.